Well, guess what? We're still in Colorado.
Yeah, there's a good place to be.
It's a good place to be. Actually, we're in New Mexico, Chama, New Mexico, and we're going to do an incredibly deep dive into the coaling tower at Chama, New Mexico.
Well, hold your nose.
Well, a deep dive into a coaling tower could be a problem.
I think so.
It is open at the top, and if you really wanted to do a deep dive, you could go up the ladder.
Come out the other end.
I don't recommend it.
No.
Well, anyway, let's get back to the coaling tower here at Chama, New Mexico. As soon as you roll into Chama, New Mexico, you're pretty much struck by the fact that there's this huge coaling tower.
Yes, it's right there. You come around the bend, there it is.
It is the most prominent feature at a very prominent and wonderful little railroad town. So much so that I decided to model it.
You did.
And this is an earlier version of the model. It's come a long way since here. But this is a 120.3 scale model of the coaling tower. And in searching for plans and details about the coaling tower, I kept thinking, let's just drive to Chama and look.
Yes.
But then I thought, but to really get the details that I want, we'd have to have a key to the door.
Right, and have somebody start it up.
And have somebody start it up, because I wanted the sound. And it's like, well, we can't very well do that. And then we heard that as part of the gathering of Victorian locomotives, they were going to be demonstrating the coaling tower.
Well, there you go.
Here's a set of plans that I found online, and they're very detailed.
Oh, yeah, look at that.
But you know what? There's just so many things. I mean, I don't care what plans you look at. It's like, okay, but how does the cable, what does it do once it goes through the wall, and how does it go through the wall? And exactly how does this mechanism that raises the lift gates work? And now this is an HO scale model.
Oh.
And I have this model.
Yes, you do.
And so I thought, I built this years ago as a kid, and I thought, oh, the Campbell kit, that'll tell me everything I need to know. No,
not how it works.
Not even. Here's the Campbell kit, and it's wonderful. It's a wonderful kit, and it answers many questions. It's got really good plans, and it's a very detailed version of the Chama coaling tower. But there's just so much about it. When you start really saying, well, how does this work, and how does this, exactly what's the size of this, and where does the mechanism, and how do the buckets dump over, and what do the tracks look like for the buckets, and you start to find out that there's just so many things you don't know.
Right.
Now, a lot of the good information that I found was from other people's models.
Right.
Because they put them online. And you could go to some of the photos that people have posted to Facebook and that sort of thing. This was probably the best example that I found.
That one's a good one.
This is darn good, and yet it still left a million questions to be answered. But this was pretty much dead on.
Right.
And it was in the same scale.
Right.
120.3. Now, this is a fun model.
Oh, isn't that the one that has the animated features?
Yeah, notice that arm, the bar coming off his arm.
Isn't that cool?
So his arms go up and down. The coal chute goes up and down. The coal chute opens. The buckets go up and down. It's really a neat model, but it didn't answer the questions that I need for this guy.
Not quite.
Almost, but just not quite. And probably the biggest question that I was having all the time was, how do those tracks work that carry the coal buckets up and down? Notice here that this is a whole brand new version of the hoist building at the bottom. There's a big problem. The first version that I had, the plan said they were 22.3, and they were not. Or they said they were 20.3, and they were 22.5. Anyway, it came out
3/4
too small. So I had to tear it all apart and start all over. But that's the problem with a thing like this. This was fun.
Yeah, it was.
You did the birds, I did the poo.
That's right. Nobody will ever see it, but we know it's there.
We know it's there. It's all just behind the roof, and it's up there. But this is the top pulley house above everything. And we thought, pigeons would move in.
Absolutely.
And there they are.
Yes.
And they're excrement.
Yes.
Yes.
They're tracks.
They're tracks, yes.
We've been here.
But I think from everything I've seen, this is with the birds and everything is pretty accurate.
Yeah, I would think so.
But the rest of it, how the pulleys work here, there's some pulleys at the midpoint, and just exactly where they sit and how the cables align with that, and then there's the mechanism down here that operates the gates, and I had more questions than answers.
Right.
And one of the big sets of questions I had were these guys, the coal buckets.
How that works.
And I thought I had it figured out based on photographs, based on plans. I went ahead and built the coal buckets and really detailed out the supports and the rivets and everything based on photographs. And guess what?
It wasn't quite right.
It's not right. It's close. And then this is the coal grates that the drop bottom gonds drop the coal down into the main chute so that it can be loaded into those buckets. And I had to change that because there's no space. You did the retaining walls.
I did. Had to be cement.
Those turned out really great.
Yeah, I was in good form.
Oh, yes. Cement form. But I had to compress the grates, and so I compressed them on the side closest to the coaling tower, but it's right up against the backdrop, and I didn't have room to make them full size. But the tower, I'm able to make full size. So there it is, kind of going together. And again, the more questions I answer, the more questions I need answered.
Isn't that the way it goes?
So, and then I got the paint on here, and I'm pretty happy with that. And when I saw the actual color on the actual coaling tower, it's close enough.
It's really close.
It's close. It's a little too dark, but there's the actual color. Now this is Pat Moffres. He's one of the friends of the Cumbres and Toltec, and he has a key to the coaling tower.
Oh, look at that.
So he let us in and gave us kind of a guided tour of what's going on inside here. The ladder is not just stored in here, it's actually used to get up onto the mechanism, and they've made it a removable ladder so people don't climb up there and get killed.
Yeah, and somebody would.
So they keep the ladder in here. Here was a revelation. The supports that run right down through the middle, and I knew that there were supports running right down through the middle. Well, I thought those were the same as the supports on the front and back wall. Not even close. Twice as many verticals, and notice diagonal supports.
For the weight.
As well. Yeah, because there's a lot of the whole weight of the tower is being carried on these three sets of posts, front, back, and middle, and most of the weight is being carried here on the center section, and so it's much, much heavier, and it has two diagonal posts. Didn't know that.
Nope.
Didn't show up on any of the plans.
Nope.
Here's where that wall sits. And you can't see it because it runs right down through the middle of the building. But the plans always show the front and back walls, but never the support that runs right down through here. So that was a revelation.
Right.
So there was a score.
Yes. Sort of like, you have an appendix, but you never see it.
Yeah, and if you do, that's a problem.
Right.
Now this is the front support over here and the back support. And again, the plans always show those because they're exposed above the roof. And then this beam going across here is actually carrying the entire weight of the coaling tower. But if we go inside the building, look at that.
Yeah.
There they are, but they are not nearly, the spacing's twice as wide, and there's no diagonal support at all. So again, most of that weight is being carried right down the center line through the middle of the coaling tower. Now this is interesting. This is the original motor that ran the whole thing, a Fairbanks Morse Y. And the coaling tower was built in 1924, and at that time there was no electricity in Chama, and so they had to run this on a diesel engine.
Oh.
But as soon as electricity arrived here in the 1930s, they just kind of sidetracked this. They didn't take it out because it wouldn't fit through the door.
Oh.
The building had been built completely around it. Pat said the Friends actually fired this thing up a couple years ago.
They say it's got about 35 pounds of pressure when they measured it, and they have an old manual they picked up from somewhere, and I think it's supposed to have over 100 pounds of compression power.
Got it. Now, fortunately, a Fairbanks Morse Y is a very common engine. And a lot of these guys who collect antique equipment, and we've been to the Threshers meets,
Oh, yeah.
and yeah, some of those kinds of things, and people will show up with one of these.
Oh, yeah.
And we've seen one of these run.
Right.
So they're really pretty neat. Being a diesel engine, they're kind of a handful to get started.
Yeah.
But there it is, the exact same engine here in the coaling tower. And just like any other Fairbanks Morse Y, it's a handful to start.
I'll bet.
And it was a handful to start in 1924.
I'm sure. Top that off with some cold weather and...
Oh man, but handles like this, I don't think this is the throttle. I'm not really sure. If anybody knows Fairbanks Morse Y, they could enlighten us on this, but I think this is actually part of the starting mechanism. At first I thought it was the throttle, but I don't think it is. Now this is really interesting. That huge thing over there is actually the exhaust manifold. And I don't know if it serves some purpose as a muffler or something, but that's really big just to be an exhaust manifold. And it's the size of a trash can or something.
No kidding.
It's this huge voluminous space, and then the exhaust pipe comes out of the top of it here. And they've used just regular heavy, like a 6-inch plumbing pipe, a threaded pipe for the exhaust pipe. And it goes up and through an angle here. And from there, it just extends right out through the sidewall.
Oh my.
As an exhaust pipe. And I have a funny feeling that rain used to run down in here.
Yeah, that's quite the innovative cap.
Because that hasn't been changed. That's just how it was. It's got a coffee can over the end of it to keep the rain out of it.
There you go.
So I guess it's always been like that since the day it was built, because I don't see any modifications to that exhaust system.
But this has got all this oiling system.
So then this was replaced with the electric motor later
Yes.
on? And so this
sometime in the 30s.
Got it. Because when we ran it, yeah, we just threw a switch and it came on.
Yeah.
So this is the original transmission that runs off the Fairbanks Morse engine. And just as the Fairbanks Morse engine isn't being used, this transmission's not being used either. The electric motor has its own transmission and clutch.
Sticking out a little bit.
Uh-huh.
You pull this, and this makes the spider gears. I believe that's how they reverse the rotation of the drum.
Now, right here is this door. I wondered what was under the door. It's the fuel tank.
That makes sense.
So this is back, it was only used for about 10 years, but while they were using the Fairbanks Morse, they would just pop open this lid, the fuel tank is there, and they would fill the tank up with diesel. There's also a lot of plumbing here, because the way this thing started was by using compressed air. And you can see here that the compressed air fittings have been disconnected. They still use the compressed air for other functions here in the coaling tower, but down here are the original air lines and fuel lines that fed the diesel engine from the compressed air here. This is one of the compressed air pipes. There are two of them, and you can see the fuel line there. And here's how they get the compressed air into the system. When Steve and I were contemplating, modeling this whole thing, we concluded that somewhere in all of this complex there must be an air compressor. But no, there's a huge air tank here, and this whole thing hooks up to the brakes on the locomotive through the glad hand, and then they just pressurize the system using the locomotive.
Well, there you go.
They don't need an air compressor.
No.
Everything's just run off of the air compressor. This is the air compressor that Steve made.
Right.
Which turns out to be, no, there isn't an air compressor, but there is now.
No.
We're not going to get rid of Steve's air compressor
no.
because it turned out too neat.
That's too neat.
But the reality is that they get the compressed air for this facility by just tying in with a glad hand to the braking system. There's a hose over here that hooks up, and then there's another hose on the other side for pressurizing that large tank and running the sand house, this hose right here.
Right.
Anyway, we're going to do another deep dive into the sand house that uses this other hose, and that's how they still run the sand house to this day, is off of the brakes from the steam locomotive through these fittings right here. You can see it's all brand new.
Yeah.
And still currently being used. Now this is the electric motor that replaced the Fairbanks Morse motor, so it's an old motor too.
Yes, I remember seeing those.
1937,
Right.
as I recall, is when they switched this over. And then here's the new transmission.
If you look right, you can kind of tell like from here to here, there's a little movement there.
Yes, yes.
And this is the clutch. I can't explain exactly how it works, but this appears to be very common on the pile driver, this kind of a clutch.
Yes.
On the pile driver and the derrick that
Yes.
they were hopefully running demonstrations with, and the ladders on this, but this is a brake. And then, so these gears over here actually turn when we have the power on.
Yes.
And we can make it turn one way, then we have an off position, then we can turn it the other direction. And like I said, these open the slide
gates down
gates
below, yeah.
for the coal to go into the buckets.
Now fortunately they turned it on.
Yes.
And they ran the whole mechanism and buckets up and down, and we got to see that, and I was able to record this sound. And if you're saying, gee, I really wish I could hear this sound, I'm going to give clean examples of all of the sounds at the very end of this video, because I'm going to use these sounds in our model coaling tower
Right.
through the sound system. Now here's the buckets going up and down. And they did not take the buckets all the way to the top and have them dump over, which is sort of unfortunate because I really needed to see how that part of the mechanism works. But when they do, the whole thing derails and jams.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're not using the coaling tower anymore. So they just don't do that. Here's where the cables come out of the hoist house at the bottom. And this was another question I had. How do they get around these pulleys and then head up? And then there's another set of pulleys about halfway up. This is interesting. I always wondered why there were windows in the back
Right.
of the hoist house, and they're built at ground level. Well, the operator needs to be able to see when the buckets reach the bottom of the shaft so that they can stop the mechanism, because there are no limit switches.
Oh dear.
If they didn't shut it off, it'd just keep playing
Oh,
out
man.
cable and
Yeah.
jam the whole thing.
What a mess.
So they visualize the buckets arriving at the bottom of the shaft here through those windows.
Right.
And when they see it hitting the bottom, they can shut it off and then open these gates to allow coal to dump into the buckets from the bin underneath the tracks there. And these are the big wheels that open those gates.
Oh wow.
And wow, I had no idea.
No.
But when you consider the weight of those gates, yeah, they need a great big huge thing like this in order to get torque. This is the winding mechanism. This is the shaft at the other end of those big wheels, and it turns this winder here, and then it all uses chain. And I thought from pictures it used chain, but this confirms it uses chain, not cable. And then the chain winds up around that winder over this pulley, and then that lifts the gate down below and allows coal to enter the bucket. And then again, they need to have the windows so they can see when this has come open and when the buckets are full of coal, so they can quickly close the gates again.
Oh, that's neat.
Isn't that cool?
That's awesome.
There was so much about this that I wondered, and when you look at plans, it's hard to see. Here's the big coal bin underneath the tracks. It's made out of concrete, and I kind of wondered about the construction of that, so it was really neat to be able to see it. Here's the concrete bin down under the grates, and you can see there's no coal in there.
No.
And normally, of course, they'd have tried to keep this as full as possible, and they dump the coal out of drop bottom gondolas that they roll out on here, and it goes down through these grates into that big bin. Now here's an interesting feature. I noticed that the gates are actually kind of high up on the bin here, so there's a huge amount of coal down below the gates that's never going to leave this bin.
Right.
And I wondered why. It's because there's a drain right here.
Oh.
So they're willing to sacrifice a certain amount of coal to get the water out, and whatever water runs in through these gates, because the grates are just exposed to the weather,
Right.
and any snow or rain or anything has to get out of there somehow, and that's how it works. There's probably just a big gravel basin.
Right. You don't want wet coal.
No. So I've actually modeled this reasonably close to how it actually functions. There's my drop bottom gone in place over the grates. Now this is the ramp where they would shove the drop bottom gons up onto those grates, and it goes up a fairly steep hill here, but it only has to raise up about 6 feet.
Oh, okay.
So it's not too hideous, and they would shove a string of drop bottom gons up here, spot one over the grates, open the drop bottom gon and dump its entire coal load, and then shove on through and drop the next load of coal down through the grates here. Now it seems to me they were only able to shove about 4 drop bottom gons up here because there's a tail track here and there's no ramp on the other side. Once you shove drop bottom gons up here, you just run out of track.
Oh, gee.
And so once you've got about 4 drop bottom gons up here, then you'd have to pull the empties out of there and bring in 4 more. Now I had a million questions about the tracks that run the coal buckets here, and none of the plans really seemed to show that adequately, and most of the models I looked at really hadn't seemed to model that accurately. You can see that there's 2 complete sets of track, both made up out of simple angle iron. I thought from plans that the front one was channel, and it's not. It's 3 pieces of angle iron that make up the tracks, and you can see here that the topmost pulley on the framework rides on the outside track.
And now that's starting to make absolute sense.
Yeah, I was so confused about this. I thought the top pulleys rode on the inside track, and I modeled it that way, and I'm wrong. You can see that the bottom pulley also rides on the outside track.
Interesting.
So that makes sense. So the entire framework goes absolutely vertically up and down the outside track. But then that raises the very interesting question, what rides on the inside track? Because I only knew about a top and a bottom pulley, and that's how I've modeled it. And unfortunately, I've modeled it so that the bottom pulley rides on the outside track and the top pulley rides on the inside track. And then I've got the framework rigidly attached to the bucket here. Well, that can't possibly be how it actually works.
No.
I also noticed that there are bolts here on the outside edge of this channel, meaning that the inside track is actually that wood section between the 2 channels here. So whatever rides on this inside track rides through this space right here. And you can see that the bolts here are recessed so that they don't hang up with this mysterious 3rd pulley that I didn't even know exists. Now up here you can see how the inside track curves at the very top, and that's what dumps the coal bucket over and dumps the coal into the upper bin on the coaling tower. The inside rail, that inside channel, just curves around, and then a new piece of channel picks up here and guides that pulley over. Now this model, the one that has the animated features, shows this, and it's like I'm beginning to sort of see how it works. The curved track here dumps the bucket over, but the entire framework stays rigid vertically in the outside track, and only the bucket tips over. So there's got to be some sort of 3rd pulley here that's going to tip the bucket over so that the framework here can stay absolutely vertical in the outside track. Now I'm noticing that on this model the buckets aren't tipping all the way over either.
No.
And that's the problem that they have with the real coaling tower. If they take the buckets all the way to the top and tip them over, they tend to derail. And so clearly back in the day that didn't happen. But somewhere here there's got to be a third pulley that rides on the bucket itself, not on the framework. And where exactly is it? We can see the upper pulley here, and we can see the lower pulley here. Where is this mysterious middle pulley? And again, it's got to be mounted to the bucket, not to the framework. So it's got to be somewhere right along in here. And I studied all of these pictures and video and everything, trying to figure out exactly where that pulley is. And notice that right here, this is one of those platforms for people to stand on. And when the bucket is in motion, you can see that on the other side of the bucket. And I thought that might just give away the location of this pulley, because it's hidden. It's inside the track mechanism here. So here I'm advancing the video one frame at a time, and there you can see that platform, and you can see that platform. So the pulley isn't here. You can still see the platform. When that pulley comes through, we should see it through that narrow crack right there. And there.
It disappeared.
It disappeared. So that tells us where that pulley is. It's right there, about a foot down on the side of the bucket. And now I know how to model that.
Right.
Because I want to change mine. And notice here from this picture, you can just barely see a heavy metal plate here.
Right.
That's got to be the support for the third pulley.
I would think so.
Because it's in the exact place that we saw the something pass between the platform and the camera. I'm just assuming that they're using the same pulley that they used on the top and bottom, but you can't see it. If the buckets were taken to the top and dumped over like this, and if somebody wanted to brave the ladders and climb all the way up there,
Yeah.
then you'd be able to see. But I'm just going to assume that they used the same pulley that they've used top and bottom, and there's just one mounted on that plate. Now notice that there are also these arms. I didn't know those were here. So when the bucket tips over, it actually lands on a floor up here. Now I knew the floor was up here, but I wasn't sure exactly how it's supported, because right here there's a coal chute, and when the bucket hits the curved tracks here, it tips over and actually slides right into that wooden coal chute and dumps its entire load down through this coal chute into the main coal bin. And I can see here that there's actual joists underneath there.
Yeah, a lot of supports there.
Because, boy, that's going to be heavy.
Yes.
In the plans, you would never see that. So I'm actually going to change my model slightly because I haven't put those joists in there, and it'll still be really easy to redesign that. Now, this is the bottom of the chute where the buckets come down. And again, the only stops on this, there's no limiting switches, so the operator has to stop these buckets at the bottom. And if coal builds up down there, guess what happens? The whole bottom of the bucket gets dented in.
Yeah, I would imagine.
And you can see all sorts of damage here from where there was, coal down there. So there's got to be these ladders, and I haven't modeled this, and I want to model this. So there's these access ladders on either side for cleaning that out. Okay, the friends of the Cumbres and Toltec are now going to risk life and limb and demonstrate the coal chute.
Kind of walking the ladder. He also has a reputation of being the fall guy. I think he was just testing us. Depends on how good of a job he does, whether or not we'll let him down. Okay, leave it there. Okay. That chute is actually hanging right by the middle, so it's easy for him to push it up. And if you see above his head that chain goes up to a wheel, you gotta follow the linkage, and that gate will come down and open up, and we're ready when you are. He's gonna try to drop about maybe 20 lumps of coal. Okay. Are we helping us when we get railroad retirement? I don't think so. What is unique about this gate? That is, there's three.
Yeah, they can.
And a can.
Who collects aluminum?
Go easy. These people, a little more. These people do not want to have to shovel the coal, so go slowly.
Don't they want to take some home for the Christmas stocking?
Yes.
Hang on
Yes.
just a second, I'm going to get to that.
Okay. You want some more, or are we good?
A little bit more.
All right.
Just a little bit. That's it.
That's good.
There you go.
Jack,
Yeah, that's enough.
more than 20.
Okay, the neat thing about this coal is it makes great gifts, and we highly encourage all of you to take a lump of coal with you. The fact that it might be easier for us to clean up has nothing to do with it. So he's just doing the reverse, and he will lock in the lock up there.
We hope. Count your fingers when you're done. So it's easy to see why they keep that ladder hidden.
Yes.
They just about kill themselves when they come up here, and so you can understand why they would not want the public just sort of climbing up here and messing around with this, because they would.
Oh, yes. Some of them would.
And originally there was a ladder at either end of this platform, just a built-in wood ladder, and those have been removed because they don't want to close this whole thing down to the public. They want people to be able to wander the yards, but they also don't want them climbing up here and getting killed. At any rate, from these pictures, we can see easily how the coal chute works.
Right.
And well documented. And I've already started. I've built my coal chute, but none of the mechanism. And so now I know how to build the mechanism.
Yes.
And make it actually work if we want to.
Right.
Now notice that there is a big cross support here and two pilings on either side of the coaling tower. Well, there's a very interesting story. This is Earl Noob.
Yes.
And Earl and I tried to fire up the coaling tower years ago with Mike Niederhauser, and it did not work.
Oh.
But what I didn't know is he continued to mess around with it because the railroad wanted to see if they couldn't actually use the thing.
Right.
And so they started using the thing.
Really?
And once they got the coal bin completely full of coal, the whole thing started to tip over.
Oh, no.
It was leaning forward.
Oh, no.
And so they had to drive these pilings in, jack the whole thing up, and put it back into level. And that's why there's this tremendous cross beam through here. This is not original, and you would not have seen that on any of the other Rio Grande coaling towers. That's how they were able to jack this up and get it back to a vertical position. And then they tore out the foundations, and they've repoured the foundations.
I see.
Again, with the idea that they might want to use this thing. But as it turns out, it's just more trouble than it's worth. The buckets want to derail, so they're just not using it. Now notice this spring here.
Yeah, I noticed that.
That's only on the north bucket, and I think this is something those guys added to try to keep it from derailing, so it couldn't completely over center and come off the tracks at the top. Must not work.
No.
Because it still derails when they take it all the way to the top. But if you wanted to model it in its current situation, you'd have a spring on the North Tower. Now, the reason that the friends of the Cumbres and Toltec were able to dump 20 lumps of coal down here is because there's still about 4 tons of coal up here in the bin.
Right.
Left over from when they were trying to make it all work. And when that's gone, they won't be dumping any more coal out of the bin. So that's why
no more souvenirs?
No more souvenirs.
Unless I come back, because I picked up what they dropped.
You got all the pieces.
I did.
And we're going to use them in our models.
They said I could, so I did.
So you did. Anyway, here's some clean audio if you want to use this in some sort of sound system. Here's the mechanism.
trolley. Ready?
Ready. Got it. Thank you. Well, this has been a very, very, very deep dive into a very deep subject.
Yes. Oh, boy.
A deep well of coal. And hopefully not boring,
Right.
but informative.
Yes.
Well, if you haven't been over to the channel, please pop over to the channel. And if you're not a subscriber, here comes a locomotive
Yeah.
and the infamous blue button. Well, we're not sure how you found this perhaps overly detailed view of the coaling tower on the internet. We hope you didn't find it boring, and we will see you here on Tuesday.
Right.
Because we have something fun to show you.
We do.